Hello BookTube! Today on my 2023 library tour, I am continuing with the history wall. Today I'm doing this second shelf here on this middle bookcase of the history wall. So let's get going. First up is a book that I need to bail redeem, and that is The Chancellor, The Remarkable Odyssey of Angela Merkel by Kitty Martin. This is a biography of Angela Merkel, the previous Chancellor of Germany, who was Chancellor for much of the early 21st century, and who was routinely one of the most powerful women in the world and one of the most influential politicians of the early 21st century. Next is a book that I really enjoyed. The Ottomans, Khans, Caesars, and Caliphs by Mark David Baer. This is a history of the Ottoman Empire from its beginnings in the 13th century through to the collapse of the empire at the end of World War I. This is an amazing, fantastic book. I loved it. Another book I really enjoyed, and I think an argument for Basic Books being one of my favorite publishers is South to Freedom, Runaway Slaves to Mexico and the Road to the Civil War by Ellis L. Baumgartner. This is a history that looks at basically U.S.-Mexican relations, how Mexico was in some ways an emancipatory republic, although not absolutely, but how when runaway slaves from Texas made it to Mexico, they were declared freed, and how in North Mexico, former slaves were integrated into the society, and it's a really fascinating history. I really loved reading this book last year. Another book I really enjoyed was Strongmen, Mussolini to the Present by Ruth Ben-Ghiat. This is a book that looks at a number of dictators from Mussolini and Hitler and Franco up through Gaddafi and Pinochet and Putin, Berlusconi, and Trump. Next is a book that I have not gotten around to yet, and that is Hadrian, the Restless Emperor by Anthony R. Burley. This is a biography of the Emperor Hadrian. Next is a book that I thought was interesting, and that is The Other Americans in Paris, Businessmen, Countesses, Wayward Youth, 1880 to 1940 by Nancy L. Green. This is a look at American expatriates who lived in Paris. Next is a book that I haven't gotten around to yet, and that is A Fistful of Shells, West Africa from the Rise of the Slave Trade to the Age of Revolution by Toby Green. Another great work by Brenda Wineapple. This is The Impeachers, The Trial of Andrew Johnson and the Dream of a Just Nation by Brenda Wineapple. This is a history of Andrew Johnson's time as president, his attempt to really basically make it look like the Civil War never happened, and basically allowing the South to treat the newly freed as pretty much how things were when they were enslaved, except for that they were owned. In the conflict between Johnson and Congress, the beginnings of radical reconstruction, or reconstruction, really, and Johnson's impeachment. And I think, if I remember, the book goes a bit into the presidency of Grant. Although I don't think it goes all the way through Grant. I think it's like just focus on Johnson's administration. Next is Andrew Jackson, His Life and Times by H.W. Brands. I want to say I had a go at this book years and years ago, but I don't really remember. I know I had a go at an Andrew Jackson biography, just don't know who wrote it. But I've been on a bit of a H.W. Brands kick the past year or so, so I picked this up. Next is The Braganzas, The Rise and Fall of the Ruling Dynasties of Portugal and Brazil, 1640 to 1910 by Malin Newitt. This is a history of the Braganza Dynasty. I've been on a bit of a monarchy kick, and so I'm trying to find a number of dynasty biographies, books about ruling families. I have one on the Habsburgs, one on the Braganzas, one on the Romanovs, which we'll get to at the very end of the tour, and I'm looking for other dynasties, the Windsors, the Bourbons, the Hohenzollerns, and others. Next is A Generation Divided, The New Left, The New Right in the 1960s by Rebecca E. Klatch. I'm rather interested in the 1960s and sort of student politics and youth politics. Next is The Making of a King, Antigonus Gonatas of Macedon and the Greeks by Robin Butterfield. This is a very interesting biography, short biography of Antigonus Gonatas. Next is a book that, in a way, I have unfinished business with. Queer Legacy Stories from Chicago's LGBTQ Archives by John D'Amelio. So this is a collection of brief sketches that I read. I think I tried to read it last year and didn't get on with it, but I would like to have another go at it. Next is Waves Across the South, A New History of Revolution and Empire by Sujit Sivasundaram. And then I have another book that I, in a way, have some unfinished business with. Miracles of Our Own Making, A History of Paganism by Liz Williams. This is a history of paganism and really neo-paganism in Britain. I read it last, I think, October, and I didn't get on with it. I thought the writing was a bit too woo-woo. But I might come back to it. Next is Our First Civil War, Patriots and Loyalists in the American Revolution by H.W. Brands. I had to go at this book in, I think, November and ended up putting it aside. I will come back to it at some point, though, because it does sound interesting, although I wasn't too enthusiastic about the opening. Next is The Greeks, A Global History by Roderick Beaton. So this is a history of Greek-speaking peoples from basically the Mycenaean civilization through to the present. I have a bit of unfinished business with this. I enjoyed parts of it, but other parts of it, not so much. So I would like to have another go at this book at some point. Next is one of my favorite books from last year, American Comics: The History by Jeremy Dauber. This is a history of American comic strips and American comic books from the late 19th century up through the present, and it is incredibly fascinating. I really love this book. Um, there's also parts where he looks around the world at comics culture in like Europe and Japan, and those are some fascinating chapters. And this book really has me wanting to read more, not only comic book history, but also more pop culture history, like video games, that sort of thing. Next is, so the next two I have not read yet. Oops. So next up is India's War, World War II and the Making of Modern South Asia by Srinath Raghavan. And finally, the last book on the shelf, and one that tried to make a run for it, Empires of the Indus, The Story of a River by Alice Albinia. So that concludes that particular shelf. I will be back tomorrow with this shelf down here, and then there will be one full week and two. So the library tour will end not this coming week, but the next on Tuesday. So anyway, BookTube, I don't think I'll put up any more videos today, but of course tomorrow I'll continue with the library tour because we do have this shelf to get to, and also there will be weekly reads, which might be a bit of fun. Because I do need to work on alternate March TBR, because my March plans did not go well at all. But anyway, until I complain about that, well, I'm not actually don't really need to complain about that because while I am disappointed that my reading plans did not turn out how I had hoped, I'm quite pleased with some of what I've read. So anyway, I'm looking forward to gushing about them on Friday. So anyway, BookTube, until I see you tomorrow, thank you, have a great afternoon, and stay safe.